Hello, good morning, happy Sunday, and happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy Father's Day to my dad and all the dads out there. And I hope you guys are all out celebrating. If I'm a woman, not a man, I'm a mother, not a father, so I certainly can't imagine what a father really wants to do on Father's Day, but my guess is it's a whole lot of nothing.
All I want to do is hold cameras.
Well, happy Father's Day, happy Sunday, and thank you for joining me again in the backyard. I will tell you that there's been a little garden quiz happening. I did a garden quiz yesterday morning. I showed you the root of a plant and asked 2 questions. I was hoping that some folks would get in a little more interactive in it as well. I've had a few answers here on Facebook, a few on Instagram. And if you look back through the feed, you'll see what I'm talking about exactly. And the 2 questions that I've asked are, what legume is this? And it's a surprising answer. There's been several answers that haven't been correct. And the second question was, is it actively nitrogen fixing? And that answer has been yes, and everyone has gotten that one correctly. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. I'll probably do a little video about nitrogen fixing plants, legumes, and specifically that plant, so you get a better idea about that. But that's some fun interactive stuff we can do throughout the week. So this week, what I really wanted to spend some time talking about is companion planting. As we're entering the end of June, as we're coming up to July, truth be told, I have no idea what the weather's going to do. It has actually been a very cool for June summer start. There's been a lot of rain, so a wet summer so far, very tropical. And it's given us an interesting harvest for this year because generally speaking, we would have had some rain earlier in the season and all of our plants would have been harvesting in May, and we pretty much would have been done in May. And sometimes May heat can actually completely kill what harvest we're expecting. But it's been, we got a late start with late rain, and it stayed cool enough for us to continue to keep harvesting things. So I'll tell you, back in May, I started saying it's time to quit planting things. Well, I'm backtracking on what I said, and I actually am still planting things. I planted yesterday several different types of flowers, still planting some sunflowers, some basil, and still planting different types of things that are in pots into the ground, hoping to have them take off. Still planting a few pumpkins even, or vining squash. Still sticking those in and seeing if I can get some of that stuff to take off at this late stage in the summer. Going back towards companion planting.
Does your garden need to have to have the ability to be responsive and nimble when your predictions aren't accurate a month or 2 later?
Yeah, absolutely. And what that ultimately means is that you don't garden in the very annual style, meaning that you don't plant on a certain date and then you're done by a certain date. And that's one of the things that I will say, working through the Grow Local system and creating that network here in South Texas and working with local agriculture and learning how all that stuff works. One of the things that I've noticed, I mentioned this to you, Joe, when you went to the farmer's market the other day. You said it was a really nice crowded farmer's market. And I said, man, that's really, really good news because it's June. And usually by the time we get to June, the crowds have completely died off, or the crowds are showing up finally again and there's no produce there. But this year we're actually seeing a meeting of the mind where the crowds are starting to show up and there's still beautiful produce available. And I think that there's a couple of reasons that has happened. I think it's because it's been a different type of growing season, but I think because our farmers have learned. I think they've learned about some of the stuff that I've been talking about over the weeks. They've learned about mulching, and they've learned about extending the seasons, and they've learned about year-round growing and how you just never know what to expect. And so true gardeners, true growers in our region are planting and growing all year long. So generally when folks are teaching kind of just beginner gardeners how to manage things, we tend to be very strict with the timeline, because I can make a mistake that doesn't affect me as much as somebody that's just getting started. Because a lot of times when you're just getting started and you make that mistake, because you went ahead and planted late, or you planted too early or whatever, then you take it to heart in a way that's like, oh, I'm not a grower, I can't do this, I'm no good at it. But those of us that are experimenting with planting on certain dates, planting on not planting all year long, we play with things and we have experiments that take off, and then we learn that there are opportunities. So the next year, when something good goes like this, when the seasons change, when things are different, you actually have successes, and then that's what's called bumper crops and just different things like that give us the ability to see produce maybe we weren't expecting. I mean, we are seeing some beautiful melons right now. I bet my neighbor across the street, his first garden, he's got glorious honeydews and watermelons and cantaloupes and all of that kind of stuff. It's really nice to see all of that production happening in South Texas right now. So, all right, was that a question from someone online? Are you able to see that stuff now?
That was a Father's Day question.
That was yes, very good. So one of the things that I learned last week when I was doing a live was that I was having a hard time seeing. We weren't able to see the questions that were coming in or the responses that are coming in, and now we've figured that out. So we can actually engage a little bit more with you out there that are following, listening. So do please ask your questions, and Joe will stop me, and then we'll go from there. But let's go back to companion planting. I'll run through my list a little bit of some of the notes I made, and then let's get up and look around, if we will. So one of the first things I want to always say, and you've heard me say it in the last few weeks, is that basil is an extremely good companion planting for summer planting. Basil doesn't generally like to grow in the cooler times of year. If we get any type of major cold snaps or freezes in the winter, you'll lose most of your basil. There are a couple of basils, Thai basil, some of the cinnamon basil, some of those that are a little hardier with a little bit more of a roots, a wood-based tree. Those will stay throughout the year, but basil is a fantastic companion plant. It's great for your tomatoes, your peppers, and lots of other plants. Now, companioning is valuable for many reasons. One of those reasons is something called allelopathy or allelopathy. And basically what that means is that plants emit a certain type of chemical hormonal thing around them, and sometimes they interact and sometimes they push away from each other. So those are important things to know, the ones that are happy together, that work well together. And then in addition to that, other reasons companion is important is for pest management. So different types of plants can help create different pest control for you. They can help deter different types of pests. They can draw in the good beneficial insects that you want to have there. So those are some of the reasons for companioning. Some of the other reasons for companioning are generally just the function and way that a plant grows. So some plants grow tall and big and take a really long time, while other plants grow close to the ground and take a short amount of time. So that gives you more availability for your spacing. Some plants grow tall and other plants need a trellis. So then that gives you the ability to use the plants as trellising systems. These are all important parts of the companion style as well. I wanted to note at the top of this, and I forgot to, but one of the most important books that I actually have loaned out into the universe and haven't seemed to get back, so I need to get myself another copy that I can again loan out into the universe, but it's a book called Carrots Love Tomatoes. It's a great book. If you're really trying to learn more about companion planting, it's a good book to have on hand. Of course, you can always look this stuff up on the internet. It's very easy. You'll find lots of YouTube videos and things like that as well. But Carrots Love Tomato is a good book to have in hand so you can flip to the pages and look through things. So basil, good one. Basil also helps with the flavoring of peppers and tomatoes. So not only is it about pest management and just structure and function, it's also about flavor. Plants will taste better. Marigold is a companion for almost anything. And it's very, you'll see when we're walking around the garden, there's lots of marigold in my garden. And as I go and I'll buy a couple of small plants already from the nursery, buy some seeds of my own, start my own seeds. Pretty much past that point, once I have marigolds going in a garden, I really don't have to buy any more seeds or plants if I don't want to, because you can deadhead your marigolds and just spread them out everywhere, and spread them everywhere. There's no reason not to have them. Marigolds are great for the nematodes in your soil. Sometimes I'll see people talking about how their carrots are growing, and especially this time of year when the heat is on, and their carrots are growing crooked, or their carrots are doing all kinds of weird things, and they'll pull it out and they'll sit, and someone will tell them, oh, it's because your soil is too heavy, or oh, it's just because it's the wrong time of year. It could actually be because there's too many nematodes in your soil.
What's a nematode?
It's basically a microscopic worm is the best way to describe it. I mean, technically an earthworm is a nematode as well. It's a beneficial nematode, but most nematodes are microscopic, and they're in your soil, and there are good ones and bad ones. And so if you look at a microscope under the soil and you see little like worm-looking things, that's a nematode. That's the easiest, simple description I can give, based on my science understanding of it. Marigolds are great beneficial for drawing in your pollinators as well. They also, if you've ever heard of a chemical that's used for pest deterrent called pyrethrin. Now, pyrethrin is actually what marigolds emit. It's the smell, the chemical smell that you might smell from a flower. If you've smelled marigolds before, you've smelled that smell. Well, a lot of chemical companies have taken the plant medicine of pyrethrin and made a synthetic version of it that then is used for different types of pest control and things like that. I would encourage you, if you're going to use pyrethrin, to stick with the natural version of it rather than the synthetic version of it. Okay, tomatoes are actually a very good companion plant. Now, one thing you need to be careful of is that tomatoes are not a great companion plant for all the different types of plants, because it's a heavy fertilizer. It takes a lot of fertilizer from the soil. So you don't want to put tomatoes with like broccoli and cabbage and stuff like that, but you do want to put it with things like carrots. You do want to put it with other things that like to grow down close to around the ground. So lettuce is a good one to do. And then you think to yourself, oh, how do I grow lettuce and tomatoes at the same time? Well, if you're growing year-round, lettuce and tomatoes are fantastic companions. So are carrots, all of that in the winter time. There's a couple of reasons why. One, they grow close to the ground. That'll help cover out the weeds around the bottom of the tomato. But the other reason is the tomatoes take a really long time to grow. And so as the tomato plant's growing, your lettuce is growing up really fast on the bottom part of it. And then as the tomato gets big, your lettuce is done, and now you have a tomato plant that's coming in. The other thing that's good about those ground covering types of plants, especially for a plant like a tomato that will freeze in the winter if there's a hard freeze, some of that ground covering can actually protect with warmth your tomato plant that might make it through the freeze, especially in our area where the freezes are very minimal and short-lived. All right, beans. Beans are a fantastic companion plant. Folks encourage you to plant beans everywhere. Part of the reason they do that is because beans are a legume. Legumes are nitrogen fixing plants. Now there's lots more information about nitrogen fixing. I saw those fingers. Legumes are a nice, great legumes are a nice, great nitrogen fixing plant. One of the things to know about nitrogen fixing plants is that generally speaking, if you allow them to go to the fruiting stage, then they're using up all the nitrogen they're making. That's not always across the board, but it's something to keep in mind. But beans can generally companion plant with almost anything. And you've got two different types of beans. You've got a bushing bean that grows around the bottom, more of a bush style. You can plant those around the bottoms of your tomatoes and things like that. And then you've got poling beans. Let's look over here real quick while we're just sitting here. This is exactly what I'm talking about with a poling bean. And so I've got the pole bean down here, and as it grows up this stalk, I've got beans coming on up here. Lots and lots of beans coming on. And so here's one of the companion styles that we can talk about, and that's what's called the Three Sisters growing method. Now, technically the Three Sisters is squash, beans, and corn. However, the Three Sisters growing style is essentially what you're looking for is a plant that has a nice stalk that grows up tall, right? Then it can grow some bushing squash around the bottom, or even for that matter, some vining squash around the bottom. That's okay. And then it can also grow that bean or that pea that grows up the stalk. And the different types of things that I like to use for what I call the Three Sisters method is okra, sunflowers, and then corn as well. And all of those can be great companions for you to grow your pole beans up, while then also growing your bushing squash around the bottom. What's bushing squash? That's your zucchini, that's your little patty pan squash, that's your yellow squash. It's mostly what's called your summer squash, whereas your vining squash, of course, is that long growing stuff like pumpkins and acorn squash, the stuff that has a little bit of a hardier winter outside peel to it. Nasturtiums are a really nice cool weather companion flower. They're also edible. You can eat the leaves, you can eat the seeds, you can eat the flowers even. They're beautiful for growing low around the ground. They help to collect aphids. In the past couple of weeks, you heard me talk about trap cropping. Nasturtium is a great plant for that trap cropping concept. They pull in those different types of insects that you don't want around, growing around. And then, of course, they bring in the beautiful beneficials with all the flowers. But nasturtium likes a little bit of a cooler temperature. So what you're dealing with there is essentially your winter garden and then your early spring garden. And then sometimes your nasturtium, if you have a nice long spring, cool spring, can go a really long time. That's actually one of my favorite plants to grow. They're so pretty. They do vine. They vine across the ground as well. Onions. I think you should plant onions everywhere. Onions. Now, there are a few things that onions don't want to be planted with, so keep an eye on that. Like I said, grab that book. That book will be very helpful for you. But generally speaking, onions are fantastic. They're filling in all of the gaps in the holes. You can just place those little onion starts. Bang. Just stick them in all the little holes around all your plants, and they are going to help with different types of pest deterrent as well. They go really well with carrots. They pretty much go with everything. I like to plant onions pretty much around everything.
And then every once in a while you have a recipe and realize you don't have any onions.
Except that one. And then I go pull that one beautiful onion out, the one last onion out, and serve it up. So if you want to hear that story, you can tune in to dinnertabletalks.com. That's our podcast that we launch every Monday, right? This one coming out this week. Episode 42 comes out tomorrow. Okay, so another great companion plant that I love is dill. And dill is also a cool weather plant. It's very good for alongside your greens, your collard greens, your cabbage, your broccoli, all of that kind of stuff, your brassicas basically. And the reason that's the case is because dill, a lot of the caterpillars that are there eating your green vegetables will love your dill. And they will actually go in and eat your dill. Now I hear a lot of people complaining, oh, the caterpillars are eating my dill. Plant more dill. Dill is a great plant to just plant all over your garden, and the reason they've termed it the dill weed is because oftentimes it'll just reseed really easily, and you'll get lots and lots of seeds from it. So it's easy to recollect those seeds and then spread them back down again. So that's a good one to have all over the place. Radish is a very good companion plant. It does a lot for ground cover. It does a lot for helping to till the soil. They grow really fast, so you can put them on the bottom. It takes usually anywhere from about 32 to maybe 50 days to grow most. I think there's some that maybe grow up to 75 days, like those big pretty watermelon radishes and the black Spanish radishes. Some of those take a little bit longer, but generally speaking, you can plant a radish that takes 32 days to grow, which means everything else around it hasn't even hardly gotten this tall yet, and your radish is full grown. So that's a great thing. It also draws in a lot of those like flea beetles and insects and things like that too. And it's great animal food. So you can just toss it over to your animals after you pull it up. Never be afraid to plant more dill than you're going to eat. Dill. Never be afraid to plant more dill than you're going to eat. Never be afraid to plant more radish than you're going to eat. It's such a great companion plant. It's really helpful also with cucumbers. And so a lot of times we will only plant radishes in the cool season because we think, oh, well, radish is a root crop, so therefore it only wants to grow in the cool season. Radish can pretty much grow year-round, and so it's really helpful to grow it with your cucumbers. Of course, it'll stay and cover the ground. It helps to attract in those cucumber beetles to keep the cucumber beetles off of your cucumbers as well. Of course, carrots are a fantastic companion planting in the wintertime. Again, I talked about that with the carrots and the tomatoes. Three Sisters, we talked about the idea of planting 3 different types of stalking and growing, pulling, all of that type of stuff. So let me show you around at some of those things that I've done here. Of course, this is an old sunflower stalk that I had to cut the sunflower out for whatever reason, but the stalk seems to stand up on most plants. That's some of the stuff you'll have to be aware of with companion planting, and this is all a learning part. You're learning, I'm learning, we're all learning, right? And that is, what is the timing of planting those things? So if you plant all of your seeds at the same time, if you plant your beans and you plant your flowers and you plant your sunflower, or you plant whatever bushing thing you're going to do around the bottom, then you might have some issues with timing, meaning something blocks out something else and it doesn't get a chance to grow up. So you want to be, you want to learn about the timing of things. So you want to make sure that the stalk has taken off first, right? And then you make sure that your bean is taken off second. A bean will actually grow pretty fast, so once it's up, it's going to take off, and then you can really get your bushing stuff to go around the bottom of that. That's a good one. Another good companion that I've learned about is this Datura plant that I've talked about for several weeks in a row. This is an ornamental. It is poisonous. You should not eat it. However, it's very helpful for your squashing plants. Excuse me. It is an attractant for that BT horned worm that we've talked about before. I like to feed those hornworms to my chickens, but this plant actually collects them here and allows them to become the beautiful moth that they can then help pollinate at the nighttime. This is a moonflower that opens up at nighttime, so it attracts those nighttime pollinators. Other types of companioning I have going on over here, where you can see the stalking plant right here, and then you can see my black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas are, even if I just cut these out, they are great just nitrogen-fixing plants, and they will grow up the stalk of anything that is around for them to grow up, right? Now you can see all of the different companion styling things I've done down here. I've got my Cuban oregano, which is a crawling plant that grows down around the bottom, around underneath a pepper plant, and my pepper plant is just doing great and putting on, that's that Peter pepper. I'm very proud of that plant. You can see all my zinnias starting to pop up in certain spaces. Zinnias are really good for, zinnias actually tend to attract the powdery mildew, and then you won't have as much powdery mildew with other things. I'm happy that most of my stuff doesn't seem to have the powdery mildew at all this time of year. That tends to happen more in the early spring is when we're seeing a lot of that stuff. But you just have different types of heights and growing and things that feed each other. They feed nitrogen into the soil because there's a lot of nitrogen sucking plants around, things like that. So let's see, what else do we have over here? Another ground cover that I talk about almost every week, of course, is yarrow. Here's a good companion thing going on over here. Let me walk around this way. You come this way. You come that way. Okay, so I've got zinnias growing here, marigolds growing here. This is a cantaloupe that's actually doing really well. It is stalking. Now, it might cause some problems for this okra plant, but I have more okra than I know what to do with most of the time, so that's okay. So I'm letting that go, and now I've got it going up into this I don't remember how to pronounce it. It's an ornamental that's related to the plumeria, and it grows really well in our region. It's got a nice stalk to it, and so now I've got my cantaloupe growing up it. Bushing down here around the bottom is lavender. This is helping to provide some shade for the lavender. The lavender likes to have a little bit of shade. It's doing really well here. It's continuing to flower. And so I've got a nice little companioning system going on around here. So.
Do you use pesticides, and how do you keep pests that destroy plants?
I use pretty much zero pesticides. It doesn't even matter whether it's organic or not organic. How do I keep healthy soil? I pay a lot of attention to my plants. I use companion planting styles of growing. I watch my plants. I pull bugs off of them. I feed those to my chickens. I don't keep pests from completely destroying some of my plants. They do completely destroy some of my plants. But in this particular garden, I'm not seeing a wipeout. So because I'm not growing in a very monoculture style here, I'm not seeing one plant being wiped out by the insects, then the next plant, then the next plant, then the next plant. I might see one plant over in one part of the garden and then go, oh gosh, I have a problem with that over here. one of the most important thing you can do for pest control is keeping healthy soil. The second most important thing you can do for pest control is to pay attention to your garden, be a part of it, and make sure that you catch it before it becomes an infestation. And once it becomes an infestation, just get rid of the plant. There's no reason to keep the plant anymore. So, okay, let's talk some more about coming up in the very near future. I believe that it'll probably start in July. I'm going to start doing a, if not monthly, workshop specific to that month and the needs for that month. And one of the things I'll talk about specifically is pest management, because part of pest management isn't just killing it, but it's understanding when it's alive the most and when it's going to be the most successful, and knowing how to manage it in that way. The other thing is that we kill things that are good. And when we kill things that are good, we're counteracting the ability for the natural ecosystem to take care of itself. And so I'm learning a lot more about not killing the good ones too, like everyone else is. Okay, so a very nice companioning system that I have gotten created over here is I've got my black eyed peas that are coming up this trellising now very nicely, and then in the midst of that I'm growing up, let's see, I'll make sure you can see it. Can you see this right here? This is going to be a nice big bushing roselle plant. It'll grow big and nice eventually, and in the meantime I've got nitrogen going into my soil down here, and I've got lots of plants reaching up and using all of these different types of things to grow up on. They will be able to grow more up on that roselle. The roselle has nice big stalks, lots of stalks. I used my sunflowers as well for different types of stalking. You can see here I have some more of the poling with the pole beans down there at the bottom. And the idea in this garden initially was to have all of my beautiful squash and melons growing really big and nicely in this area over here. This garden hasn't loved growing squash and melons. It hasn't been a good garden for that yet this year. So those are some things that I'm learning about how to manage this garden. Every time it rains, I know in this garden now, the soil is completely saturated back here. I have standing water. My squash doesn't like that. Squash vines don't like being in the water. They don't want that much water to them. So that's one of the things I've been learning about. You can see here that I'm placing in the mix of it, not just that roselle, but other types of stalking things like okra. Over here you can see I created trellising for cucumbers, but this is helping, you know, I'm pulling things in, I'm pulling the flowers in, I've got different stalking things happening. Some of my favorite companions for ground cover type of situation are the herbs that you can grow. So I've got some stevia that's happily growing down here, and some of this shade is really good for this stuff. This is not stevia. This is stevia, this is thyme. This stevia is really taking off and happy. It's enjoying not only the warmth, but it likes the shade and the warmth at the same time. So that's what I have going on back here with different types of companioning. My tomatoes growing basil alongside them, and my tomatoes need more sun than they're getting over there, but they're getting a good amount of sun. I'm going to take this cucumber. This cucumber vines have been, these late season cucumbers are amazing to me. It's been a really interesting season for cucumbers because no one could grow cucumbers for such a long time. Everyone had all the different squash, but nobody had cucumbers. And now all of a sudden we have cucumbers coming out our ears, literally. All right. Are there any other questions on there? Very good.
Some thank yous and some this is so interesting.
Ah, very good. So I do this every week if this is the first time you've ever tuned in. And I try to come up with what's the topic for that week and stay pretty close to it, although I'm happy to answer as many questions as you have available to you. And then, like I said, I will be doing some workshops, hoping with some of the stuff we're doing with like resurgence of potential, well, the virus, and just trying to be real careful with that, right? I'm going to do some online versions of workshops and still allow some people to come out to the workshops as well. So if you're interested in some of that, send me a message. And then, of course, if you're interested in having me come out and help you with your particular garden or a space you'd like to turn into a garden, whether the goal of that garden is simply to turn a lawn into something more productive, or whether the goal is to really begin feeding your family at a higher level, I can help you out with that, whether it's edible production or just generally for birds and butterflies and whatever it is you want to do in there. I can help get you started, and I can help give you some of those timelines. And please tune in every week when you're available, and if you're not available at 10:30 on Sundays, check out YouTube. You'll find this available on Aislinn Campbell YouTube channel later on this week. All right, y'all have a wonderful Sunday, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers.